but they have promised, and Netanyahu has stated that they will retaliate. Initially, they said they were going to retaliate, that very night, and then, the whole Middle East would see it. And then they pulled back from that and said, okay, we'll retaliate at some time of our choosing, and but that we will. Now, interestingly, both France and the UK have said that they will have no part of a retaliation. If that's the way that Israel, and advised Israel not to. So they're getting cold feet on this, maybe becoming a little bit more realistic.
So who's in Israel's corner? Is it just the U.S. now? U.S., Canada? I mean,
yeah, it's just still. Yeah, still these Western countries like France or UK, they support Israel. They'll probably keep on sending them months, but they don't want to be directly involved in an attack on Iran. But the U.S., I think the U.S. probably would not want to be, but they keep on saying that they're standing by Israel. They'll defend them. They'll continue to supply the weapons that Israel uses, that they would use in an attack in Iran. And, well, they offered, they obviously also provide air defense, but it didn't seem like it amounted to anything. But they're there, I think in case things start to go really wrong for Israel, then we'll see. That's when they, that'll be the moment of truth. It's just like, will the U.S. actually attack Iran? And I think, at some point, the pressure for it to do that may become overwhelming. Now, not Israel, but Iran has already made it clear that if any other power, and I think they're really pointing to the U.S., becomes involved, attacks Iran, that their bases, will immediately become objects of Iranian attack. Again, the U.S. has many bases throughout the Middle East, and those in Iraq and Syria are particularly vulnerable.
Yeah, it's a scary situation. I mean, I just feel like if the U.S. does get involved, then there's going to be a lot of body bags, flag draped coffins coming back to the U.S. because these bases in the Middle East, they are sitting ducks. There's nothing that we can really do. So it's like, why are we there? Are we there just for moral support? I mean, if you do carry out a strike on Iran, then they're gone. There's not going to be an airstrip for those planes to come back to. But
Right.
I
Right. Yeah,
just
that's
don't
something
understand.
that's actually something that somebody pointed out, right? If Israel, if it attacks Iran, almost certainly will do it using its aircraft. It'll be manned aircraft. But this will it takes a while for them to get to Iran and to return. It's going to be an hour or something, and they have to be refueled in flight. And during that, again, Iran can send high precision missiles that take less than 15 minutes. So if that's in fact what Israel does, if it launches an air attack on Iran, Iran can strike all the bases, every last air base in Israel, hit the runways, crater them. Now, I think they may have done that already, but runways can be repaired fairly rapidly, in a matter of certainly of days, maybe in a day, but I don't think they can be repaired in minutes or in hours. And you'll have these planes that won't have a place to land.
Yeah. Well, so then an Israeli retaliation will come, but I kind of wonder what form will it be? Because I was also thinking that will they use their Air Force? I see kind of three options. If they use the Air Force, that seems to be a very poor decision because it takes time. Iran has air defense systems supplied by Russia, the S-400, as well
Right.
as
Aircraft are particularly vulnerable to air defense systems.
right. So you wonder how close they would even be able to get, and during that flight time, Iran would have plenty of time to respond. Another option is if they're able to use some type of assets that they may have already within Iran, like the MEK or something like this, to pull off some type of terrorist attack, detonate some type of large explosive, covertly within Iran. But then the third option is, I guess, would be their inter ICBMs, their intercontinental ballistic missiles. They have the Jericho 2, the Jericho
Right.
3,
Right.
which have can definitely reach Iran, and these ballistic missiles are very difficult to intercept. Who knows? The S-400 coupled with these electronic warfare systems, maybe they could take down the Jericho. But I think Iran doesn't. It's a gamble. With these things,
Right.
who knows if they can take it
Right.
down or not.
Yeah. No, yeah, my understanding again, Scott Ritter, is very good on this because he was, a weapons inspector, but he specialized actually in missiles. Like he was involved directly. I think he was in charge of the campaign to eradicate the Scud launchers during the first Gulf War, and so this is something he really knows what he's talking about. And he said that, yeah, they do have the Jericho 2 and Jericho 3 that can easily reach Iran, but they're really not designed for, again, anything like a war of attrition. They're very expensive, very limited in quantity. So yeah, you could hit a high value target, but you can't overwhelm air defense systems like the Iranians did, because you just can't send them in the numbers that the Iranians sent their missiles. So yeah, they might be able to hit a target or two. There's a question again. The S-400, again, like you say, coupled with the EW systems provided by Russia, but certainly these are capable of taking down the Jerichos. Now, they may not do it. There's always a chance that something will get through, and if we've seen from the Ukraine war, it's when Russia's confronted with a new weapon, it usually takes them a little bit of time to tweak their system, to neutralize that weapon. So, maybe the first volley of Jerichos, some would get through and could do some significant damage, but that would probably be about it. And again, it just can't, they won't be able to carry out the widespread kind of devastating attack with the Jerichos, so they just don't have the numbers to do that.
Right. I was chatting with GPT, the O1, yesterday, asking about the probability of a Jericho 3 hitting a target in Tehran if the S-400 plus these electronic warfare systems were there. I mean, it gave me a percentage of 30 to 60% chance of intercepting it. Of course, this is GPT. It doesn't mean anything, but I was just curious, just kind of seeing what it would say. And I'm like, I don't know. But the thing is, nobody knows because it's never been done before. So
Right.
And we can speculate all we want, but I think that the real fear is that the ICBM would be used to carry a nuclear payload. If
right.
ever,
Well, that's really, it's designed for it. Right. It's nuclear capable.
we talked about this
Right.
earlier that in a war of attrition or in a war with Iran, that likely Israel would escalate immediately because they know that in the long run they can't win this war of attrition, that they would maybe go nuclear sooner rather than later. We talked about just their willingness to use nuclear weapons if they feel like the existence of Israel is at stake, and that just the fact that their deterrent capabilities are no longer exist, that in itself is existential. So that
Different. Right.
Right. So if that's the case, do you think that what is the chance that surely they wouldn't start with a nuke? Like that would just be the end of Israel, right? I mean, there's no way. But the thing is, I'm like, no way. But then so many things that I've seen Israel do, I've been like, no way. That's it. So I don't know if it's a rational actor.
Exactly. And they've just shown a real savagery, like just a complete lack of restraint and disregard for, I don't think that they've reached that point, where they would use a nuclear weapon like at this stage. But I think the threshold for Israel is much lower than it is for another country, certainly like Russia. When Russia says that its existence is threatened, well, I think they're quite serious about that. I mean, there would be tremendous reluctance to do it. And then, and I think, thank God, Russia is large enough and strong enough where that is highly unlikely. It's possible, especially if NATO goes all out on an air campaign against Russia, that could happen. It could trigger. a response. But in the case of Israel, I think they've shown that they're in general that you don't need to give them much of an excuse for launching any kind of war, right? They've and I'm afraid that we'll have to be honest about that. It's going to also apply to their use of nuclear weapons. It's not, their notion of let's say an existential threat is defined much more broadly, I suspect, than it is by other countries. And yeah, just like the loss of fear among their adversaries, I think that would be sufficient for them. It could be anyway. And we are starting to get, we're not there yet, but
we're pretty damn close.
Yeah, we're getting close. So it is scary.
Well, Iran, basically this ballistic barrage, we said in the last podcast that at this point Iran has to retaliate. The amount of pressure internally in Iran and just really throughout the region, almost globally, for Iran to do something, especially after failure to respond to the Ismail Haniyeh assassination, was reaching at this point. And then after the assassination of Nasrallah, it seems like this attack by Iran was like almost like a disciplinary action towards Israel. This wasn't they're not leveling Tel Aviv. It was, even though it was a large ballistic attack, it was measured and calculated. It was done at night. It targeted these air bases, which were probably mostly empty at the time. I don't know. We may never know the extent of the damage. But they said that if Israel responds, attacks Iran, then they will unleash the real attack. They will unleash devastation. And so what I'm afraid could very easily happen. I mean, I'm not making, huge logic leaps here, is that, okay, Israel promised retaliation, they will. Iran warned them, if you do this, then we will send a bunch of missiles. And then at that point, that's when Israel launches their Jericho 3 ICBM with a nuclear warhead headed towards Tehran. That's what I'm afraid of, is that they'll do this, they'll try to pull off some big attack. Let's hope it's not successful. But if it is, then Iran unleashes thousands of missiles. And this time, it's a clear message that, okay, we're ending you, Israel, or coming, really doing some real damage. This isn't just we're not playing around anymore. And then that's when Israel launches Jerichos with nuclear warheads. I just think that's just the way I see it playing out right now. I mean, of course, we don't know. Who knows what's going to happen, but it just seems to me the most logical conclusion to this conflict right now. And this could happen in a matter of weeks. Do you think that's what do you think? Am I being insane?
No. The problem is that we have you can almost say an insane country. Is Israel. It's in the grips of some kind of insanity. It's on a rampage, and I mean, like in retrospect, I shouldn't have been shocked, but of course, after this, the rampage in Gaza, the genocidal onslaught there, I shouldn't have expected anything different in Lebanon. But I thought, now it's, I guess I was thinking back to past invasions. Yes, they were cruel, they were, unwarranted, but they were actually showed some sort of restraint. There was not much of an effort to minimize. There wasn't an effort to minimize civilian casualties, but it seemed like they took that into account. They didn't want to, didn't want civilian casualties to be excessive. There certainly were many civilian casualties, but now they just obviously don't care. It almost seems to be intentional. It's not just that they're, it says, okay, there's one Hezbollah commander in one house. We'll just take out the neighborhood. Okay, there's a meeting of Hezbollah leaders. We'll take out the 6 apartment buildings and kill who knows how many hundreds and hundreds of civilians. And they do it obviously without any Um, it seems like without any hesitation. Yeah, there just it seems to be a total disregard for you could say Gentile life, in this case. Um, and yeah, so I'd like to say that, oh, that just can't happen, but I can't. It's just on the basis of what we've seen. If I don't think they're going to go to it right away, but they may find themselves in a bad position fairly quickly, and then the pressures will build within Israel to use, at least some sort of tactical nuclear weapon. They might not go through outright, like obliteration of Tehran, but maybe first a tactical nuclear weapon, used against a certain facility or something like that. But I could see it happening. I think we're closer to it than we have been
Ever.
for a long time, maybe ever. When we talk about the possibility of, the use of nuclear weapons, the focus is always on Russia and Ukraine. And yeah, it's important to consider that possibility, of course, with, of course, that's where if it goes nuclear, it could become world ending. And so even if the odds are very low, it's a very, very serious matter. But I think that the chance that nuclear weapons is going to be, if nuclear weapons are used sometime in the near future, it's much more likely that they'll be used in the Middle East and they'll be used by Israel. And, one thing I want to show you, um, it's clear, I think, that Israel has miscalculated. They've underestimated the strength of Iran and its resolve, and that they've done the same thing with Hezbollah. I think this is, well, it may be actually in part a consequence of their initial successes against Hezbollah. These decapitation strikes, you have to say, were very successful. Shockingly successful. And I think that's made them overconfident. It's something that you see in war again and again. We can think of all kinds of wars that have begun, of course, the most famous is World War II, where in the early stages, the Germans had, amazing success, in both the West and in the East. And well, especially because they're success in the West, they went too far, and with the consequences that we all understand. But it can create this overconfidence, and then you lose your proper sense of caution and realism. And maybe that's what's happening in Israel. That Netanyahu feels really emboldened, and so we see, okay, we've got this. Of course, there's the missile attack that we were just talking about, is so very important. But let's not forget about the ground invasion, which has begun. And interestingly, all the initial reports are that Israeli forces have been badly mauled, and that there have been several deaths among IDF soldiers. And so that's actually gone off to a very bad start. One thing we're always pointing out, for a long time is that, again, that's where Hezbollah's strength is, and that the last time that Israel attempted an invasion in 2006, they were taught a really harsh lesson by Hezbollah. And so that's why a lot of people were doubting that they would even try it, but they did it. And I think it may be just a symptom of this overconfidence. This initial success has made them think, now Hezbollah, we have them on the ropes, we can do it. And now we see this is, an old story that's played out in many wars, a power that's initially very successful becomes overconfident with terrible consequences.